Let's just do a simple one. What's been the most pleasant surprise you've had this week? I'll start. Like I said, I'm in California at my mom's at the minute, getting ready to go about 2 hours north of here for a family wedding tomorrow, which is going to be sort of a weekend-long event. And I shouldn't actually be surprised at this, but the pleasant surprise is going out of the horrible cold Wellington winter into bright, hot sunshine, and just how much that lifts my spirits. That's me. I'd like to go next.
I'll go. We had a pleasant surprise this week. This is a work one. We've been doing a little project called Access All Areas, which is in part kind of connected to the project we're doing for this. We were contacted by the supplier of some beach wheelchair matting. And he said, I haven't got a WA distributor, and we're in negotiation with him to be that distributor for him. So that was an unexpected surprise for us.
Good one. Who's next?
I can go. So I learned that I will be teaching a class for the University of Colorado starting in the fall, which is not something I've ever done before. But I was really pleased to be given the opportunity. It's a certificate course for professionals in corporate social responsibility, or CSR. So I'm excited to do that.
That's awesome. Who's next?
I'll go next. I'm Nerily. I'm from Avivo. I'm pleasantly surprised this week in discovering how habitual I am. I didn't realise that I was very predictable.
You have to dig into that more at some stage, Nerily. Katina's coughing now. That means you can go.
I'm having trouble thinking of something. Pleasant surprise. I can't think of something. There's bound to be something. Probably just washed over me. No, I have to pass today, I'm afraid.
That's all right. And Katina, you're doing well. What's your pleasant surprise this week?
Hang on. Yep. Okay. I thought I couldn't get my mute off. Pleasant surprise this week was, unfortunately, I couldn't follow through with it because I've been too sick, but I've got a prospect of a couple of extra clients, and some of them actually we're going to be doing with Avivo. We'll be working in conjunction with Avivo as well. But I can't go anywhere near them with the flu, so I have to wait till hopefully next week when I'm feeling better. And so I don't want to make anybody else sick.
It sounds like a good, pleasant surprise worth waiting for.
Yeah.
So that's great. So again, welcome. I think this is our fourth session together. Is that right? Third or fourth? Something like that? Third, number 3. So Pete, as I kind of briefed you on this group, it's fantastic that we've got sponsorship from the Western Australia Individualized Services, which is a sector agency for building capacity in the human services sector in Western Australia. We're offering a variety of these programs, but this one in particular is aimed at supporting organizations outside Perth, which is the main center in Western Australia, and kind of like a double whammy of learning how to do or practicing with virtual tools and virtual facilitation, making commitments to each other, learning together, and sharing our experiments. So this program runs until September, so really excited about that. And as I said when we started, I'd just love to go around the room one more time and just ask everybody to introduce your organization in a couple of sentences. what you're finding so far on this experience, and what you are practicing at the minute. So how about we go backwards this time, and you can start, Katina.
Sorry. Katina from Connecting Communities, CC Home Care Incorporated. We actually support people with disabilities and the aged in the community. The aged, we actually work with Avivo, and we also are training up people with disabilities in the workforce. We've already got 3 working for us, and so we can give them gainful employment. And I've already learned quite a lot from this. Sorry, my head's still not quite with it. Yeah, it's been an eye opener so far, and I'm really looking forward to all the sessions.
Thanks, Katina. What about you, Nat?
Good morning. So I'm Natalie, and I'm from Avivo, and we, like Nerily, we are a not-for-profit provider of in-home supports for people with mental ill health, aged care and disability needs. I'm specifically in the comms and engagement back office part. We, as an organisation, are evolving to be looking at more of a platform for us to have self-managing teams out in the field and also back office. And my team is one of the first back office teams to be in the middle of that. So it's been exciting and full on. And we are given the timing with end of financial year, looking at 2 components, our strategy and also our purpose. So we sort of feel like we're, in under it at the minute, but, thoroughly enjoying that it's challenging. So it's great. Having a good time.
Thanks, Natalie. Nerily?
Hi, I work in the same organisation as Natalie, and I work in a community team. At the moment, my role is in support and development of a few, experiments, I'd say, that are in the Perth Hills in working in a self-managed way. So we're not quite where Natalie is at the moment. We still have a directive leadership in our area, but we're experimenting with a few things.
There you go, and I'm Zane DeMello. I work for Atlas, which is Access to Leisure and Sport, and we use leisure and sport to create inclusion and access for people with disabilities in whatever's going on in the rest of the community. As we're just a little startup organisation, but we do things slightly differently. As a part of planning, we decided to consider a question as what would our mission look like if we weren't relying on government funding. We're still going to play in the NDIS paddock, but some pretty creative and interesting things come with non-profits when you ask that question. So part of our gig is that we do some self-generated activities. We've got a labour hire business, and we're just completing a little project called Access All Areas, and the WA distributor is on the back of that. But the initial idea with that is to put a whole lot of access gear on the back of a trailer for events, and then bring that out to events and set it up so that everyone can get to them. And so at the moment, I guess where we're up to with this project is it does feather in. Our little project's one, I'll just call it Cinefly, because that's the product that we're going to use to create user-generated content. Pardon me. we're going to video our leisure buddies who are our support staff so that our participants can pick who they want to work with rather than us telling them who they want to work with. So they'll get a resume and a video as the initial introduction, and then obviously the face-to-face follows after that. But that's our pilot project or experiment, as we're calling it here for this project.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Just before I hand over to Pete to do an introduction of himself, I'm feeling incredibly honored for it to happen here with us this evening. One of the reasons I was thinking that Pete would be a great first guest for this particular group is, well, just because of who he is, but also working in the B Corp purpose-driven organization sector for a long time, and understanding that just because you're an organization with a social mission and claim that you have purpose over profit doesn't necessarily make you a high-functioning, participatory, self-managing, experimental organization. And so he's got some fantastic stories and experiences that I think would be really useful and helpful to your journey. And yeah, just the opportunity for him to share his learnings and answer like questions from the coalface, I think will be really super useful. Pete, I met Pete about a year ago. Has it been a year yet? Yeah.
I think that's about right.
And he participated in another version of this program, which is a very condensed 5-week intensive 10-hour a week full-on experience. So we've got the leisure of doing this over 5 months, but Pete hung in there with this big kind of powerful intense thing. So it was great to learn from him, and I think that it'll be easier and flow really nicely just because he has been where you've all been. So it feels really good. So Pete, I'd love for you just to take some time to tell your story, because it's a fascinating one.
Sure. Thank you, Susan. And thanks everybody for welcoming me and sharing your work and experience right now. It sounds like you're all doing meaningful work in the world, which is, I think, something most people aspire to do, but not everyone gets to do. So I love that. Let's see. So my story. So I was born. Okay, wait. We don't have to go that far back. Let's rewind to about 2010. I was leading a company that I had started 12 years earlier. That was a software testing lab in Denver, Colorado. And I thought we were a pretty progressive workplace. I thought we had some progressive practices socially and environmentally in terms of our workers. And but there was something I don't know, nagging at me that maybe we could be doing more, we could be doing better. And so I began to learn about the B Corp community. I actually spent some time, I put my job on hold at my software testing company and went to spend some time in a nonprofit in Denver that was focused on training and convening businesses for the purpose of becoming more sustainable. And it was called Connected Organizations for a Responsible Economy. So I spent some time there as executive director, and during that time became much more familiar with the B Corp movement. And that set us on a path at my company to becoming B certified in 2012. And so that was sort of the beginning of my journey toward more, say, purposeful work and sustainable work. However, as Susan points out very clearly, that does not necessarily mean that you have terribly enlightened practices when it comes to how you organize. Whether we tended to be more hierarchical, perhaps, than would be ideal. We tended to be less transparent with information than we could have been. There were several things that we weren't doing particularly well at that time. But gradually, as I got more and more involved in the B Corp community, I also from another B Corp, actually began to learn a little bit about self-management. And by 2014, when Frederick Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations, came out, I was a prime candidate to read that book and begin absorbing some of the concepts there. And so I did that. And one of the downsides of waking up to some of the magic of this way of being together, this way of working together, is that you may no longer be suited for the thing you were doing before. And I realized that I had really two choices. Could I change the software testing lab, Prototest, into something that felt purposeful and meaningful enough to be fully satisfying to me? Or did I need to move in a different direction? And in the end, after really some soul searching and some good deep talks with the people I worked with, I made a surprising decision to some, which was to shut a business down and move on from it. And so at the end of 2014, I did that. I told the employees that when they all had new jobs, we would close the doors. And so basically gave everybody time to go look. And once they all had found, we had 32 people at the time. And once they all had found new positions with our clients and our competitors and some other firms, we closed the doors and I moved on to my next thing. And so I've always been very concerned about environmental sustainability as one aspect of my work. And so my next stop was to join a renewable energy company that was also a certified B Corp here in Boulder. And this time when I showed up at the renewable energy company, I showed up with Reinventing Organizations tucked under my arm. And I asked everyone, who wants to start a book club? And sure enough, about half the company decided they'd like to join a book club. And so we read Reinventing Organizations, and that set us on a path of beginning to think much more constructively and actively about how could we bring our whole selves to work, how could we really sense into the evolutionary purpose of that organization, and how could we begin the practice of self-management. And so that was my, I guess, next deeper dive into this way of working. And I spent 2 years there implementing these principles and practices. And it was so successful that it cost me my job. I say that facetiously. It was so successful that we were acquired. We were performing extraordinarily well and having tremendous impact. In fact, we put about 1.5 gigawatts of wind energy on the grid in 2 years. So that's utility scale, very significant scale. And we were supporting the work of big corporations that were adopting renewable energy. So like Amazon, Salesforce, J&J, Johnson & Johnson, and many others that you've heard of were our clients, and we helped them do that. So when Renewable Choice was acquired by a big French multinational, I had some decisions to make, and I decided that I didn't really want to take another lap in big corporate world. And so I stepped down, left the organization, and decided to think for a little while about what I'd like to do next. But it didn't take me long to figure out that what I really wanted to do was help purpose-driven organizations adopt self-management principles and practices, and by doing so, increase their impact and their effectiveness, help them be more adaptive in the face of change, help them be stickier and more engaging for their employees, where people felt a deeper sense of connection, a deeper sense of ownership, help them to be, frankly, more human-centered in really constructive ways. And we can talk more about what that means to me. But and so that's what I've been doing now for a little bit over a year. I've been working with social enterprises, nonprofits, and B Corps to help them adopt this way of working. And I have found it enormously rewarding. It was a great pleasure that I got connected with Susan and got a chance to go through the work that you're doing, because that just added to my comfort with the principles and the practices and my ability to translate that for clients and help them to adopt these practices. So I feel like that was kind of the rocket booster behind my effort to contribute in this work. So and so here we are now. Here we sit together. And I'd be happy to answer Susan's questions or any questions that you all have about any aspect of the work, really.
Pete, it might be nice just I'm not sure how many of us are familiar with B Corps or benefit corps. If you could just give a little bit of a elevator pitch on what that is.
Oh, yes, I'd be thrilled to do that. So if you go to the letter B, bcorporation.net, you'll see all about the B Corp movement. It was started 10 years ago in Philadelphia in the United States, but it has since spread to about 50 countries. There is an active B economy movement in Australia and New Zealand, and there are B Corps there. In fact, there is at least one self-managing B Corp that I know of in Australia. Small Giants, I believe they're called. Is that right, Susan? Do you think Small Giants? I can look it up. I think that's what it is. Anyway, it's a movement basically to provide a rigorous certification for triple bottom line businesses to have a very meaningful assessment. They call it the B Impact Assessment that looks at a company in terms of how it relates with its workers. So there's a category in the assessment that focuses on employees or workers, how it interacts with the community socially, and there is a community component to the assessment. There's a governance component to the assessment, and employee-owned and self-managed organizations can earn additional points in the governance section. And there's an environmental section where you look at all of your environmental impacts. And another dimension that it looks at is your business model itself. So if it's a purpose-driven business model, you can earn additional points toward the certification. And now the funny thing is, you only have to score 80 points out of 200 in the assessment to become certified, which when I went to school, that was a D or an F. That was not a good grade. But it turns out that 80 points is actually extraordinarily difficult. I think the average score among organizations that take the assessment is about 55 points. So, and when Prototest, my software testing lab, first took the assessment, we scored, I believe, 43 points. And I was devastated because I thought we were so progressive and so, doing all these amazing things. And we had a long way to go. We had a lot more that we could be doing. So there are now about 2,600 certified B Corps around the world in 50 countries in every industry. Some are big ones that you might have heard of, like Ben & Jerry's ice cream, for example, or Natura, the big Brazilian cosmetics company. And Danone in North America is a certified B Corp. They're the biggest public certified B here. But there are many, many that are much smaller and have anywhere from a handful to a few dozen employees as well. So is that a good summary?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Pete. I'd like to just kick us off. I'll ask both questions and you can decide where to start. So it's fantastic that your startup that started with the intention of being different was so commercially successful. And I'd love to just get your kind of high level sense of what it was about starting with that intention that allowed you to be so successful so early. But then also maybe segue into the difficulty or the challenges that you see in the work that you're doing now and maybe the work that you started initially, with the difference between inviting an organization to transform from an instantiated way of working to something different, and how you kind of hold that, because everybody here is in, at some level, traditionally organized organization.
Yeah. So I think there are some distinct advantages if you start with this intention right from the beginning to work in a self-managed way and to have a clear, meaningful, inspiring purpose. You can rally folks around those things in ways that are more difficult in established legacy organizations that have transformation to go through to get to this place. So I would say anytime someone has the chance to start from scratch with these things in mind, I recommend it. I've actually talked to a few early startups since I've been doing my work as Ever Better, and they've said, we're not ready for you. We're not ready to talk about self-management, or we're not ready to talk about a galvanizing purpose, and we're just trying to get a minimum viable product and get something going here. And I urge them to pause and think deeply about what they're doing, because every habit that we form individually and as organizations, there's a habit we'll have to break later, right? If we haven't been intentional about setting it now. So I don't think it's ever too early to think about this. Now, if you flip it around and say, okay, but what about the long established organizations? Several of the ones that I've worked with so far, they've been going for 10, 15 years, and they have formed some pretty strong habits, some pretty deep history, and there can be things to unlearn. I'll give a really simple example. If an organization has been fairly strong in its hierarchy and fairly strong in its predict and control behaviors, people develop what is sometimes called learned helplessness. Are you all familiar with that term? Have you discussed it? A little bit, maybe. So learned helplessness is the idea that psychologists discovered that if you take away people's sense of empowerment, if you override their decision making enough times, people become convinced of their inability to decide, their inability to take action. They begin to disempower themselves reflexively. And so sometimes if you come to a team that has had some of that experience and they built that up over time, either in your organization or even perhaps in other employment situations before, and you say, hey, we're going to do a new way of working, and you have a tremendous amount of freedom and responsibility in this new way, and you're going to make some very important and exciting decisions on your own, and no one's going to second guess you. They eyes get big, and people are like, oh, I'm not sure. First of all, I'm not sure I believe you. And secondly, I'm not sure I want to have that much responsibility. I had one fellow at Renewable Choice Energy. He was the head of sales. He probably came to me 3 times a week at first and said, Pete, we've got this really complicated situation going with this one customer. And boy, if we do this, it could end badly. And if we do that, it could end badly. So I want you to decide. And that was a classic case of learned helplessness. And I would just sit and smile and be quiet and wait and say, hold on just a second. Let me check the short list of things I need to decide on your behalf. Nope, that's not on there. And he would say, well, but what if it doesn't go well? What if I make the wrong decision? And I would ask, what if it doesn't go well? What might happen? Well, I don't know. Will I be in trouble? Will there be a bunch of shame and blame? What's going to happen? And I said, here's what's going to happen. If you are thorough in your decision process and you follow the practices that we've put in place and you consult your stakeholders and you make a well-informed decision and it doesn't go well, first of all, you will know at that moment that your decision was safe to try and that you had a chance to try that decision without irrecoverable consequences. And secondly, we'll use it as an individual and organizational learning opportunity. We'll conduct a retrospective and look at it and say, what do we wish we had known when we made that decision? And what could we do better the next time? And there will be no shame and there will be no blame. And so if you repeat that with people often enough, over and over, they internalize the new behavior. They begin to feel more comfortable taking risks. They begin to feel more of a sense of ownership for decisions and feel better about making those decisions themselves. But it can be a lot of work at first. So, and that's just one example. But for all the principles and practices that I'm sure Susan has been outlining for you, old behaviors can be hard to overcome. It takes a lot of practice.
And so for you, and practice is the key word, right? This is not something that you just decide one day and you're good at the next day. It's it takes a lot of practice every single day. This might be projecting like a male characteristic onto this, so please forgive me, Zane and Pete. But coming into something and wanting to be really great at it straight away is a behavior that I often see in the men in my life. And being able to kind of hold your nerve and realize that you're not going to be great at it straight away, but if you practice every day, pretty soon some muscle memory will kick in, and then you can do that part without thinking about that part and start to sense and see the patterns and feel more comfortable about it. What as a I'm just going to say it, as a male leader, what were some of the things that you found most challenging about shifting from command and control, being the boss, to the way that you work now?
Yeah. So first, let me just say I don't I don't mind the generalization. I think there's actually quite a bit of validity to it, Susan. Men, in my experience, men at work are often less willing to behave in ways that are vulnerable. They're less willing to, or less likely to show up with humility. They may not be aware of their privilege. And, you know, gosh, I check all those boxes. So, you know, I'm white, male, straight, cisgendered, English speaking, US born. I have a lot of privileges in the world. And so, but very often guys aren't as attuned to their privilege. And so, yeah, I find that very often women take a little more quickly to this way of working because of a natural willingness to be more vulnerable, more curious and social in their approach to problem solving. And so, you know, and this is all about collaboration, right? It's not about competition. And so as I'm working with male leaders, particularly founders and CEOs who are male, I really encourage them to do some introspection about, you know, what do they know about their own personality, their own, have they done any work, for example, with a system like Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram or DISC or something where they have some insight to their tendencies, and just encourage modeling, showing up with some humility, some vulnerability, not having to get it right right away and not having to be right all the time. And I think leaders in general, and Susan, you and I have talked about this, leaders in general, male and female, there are some things that are projected on leaders that, you know, in some sense, you should have all the answers, right? You're the boss, so you should know. And any of us that are honest with ourselves in a leadership role, we know we don't have all the answers. We're not right all the time. You know, if you're right half the time, you're doing well, right? You're doing quite well. So being able to just admit that openly and, you know, and share that that reality with teams is a great first step to easing into more supportive leadership and less directive leadership.
I love that. I'd just like to hear from the rest of you. What's coming up for you as you hear Pete speaking? Mm-hmm. What's questions you have? What would you maybe like to know more about?
I agree with Pete because I'm continually letting my staff know that I'm always learning through them as well, because I don't always have the answers. Although I've been in this industry nearly 30 years, I still don't have all the answers, and things are changing all the time. And you get a different perspective by listening even to the younger generation, because they come up with things you never even thought of. And as I'm learning from them, we're making changes all the time. We're not sort of sitting still and expecting this is the way it's done all the time. This is how we're going to keep doing it. We're always finding new ways of trying to improve. And so I'm learning through my staff. Even my disabled staff are teaching me quite a lot. The young boys that I've got, and some of the things that they come up with, you know, that I had never even thought of. And so I agree with you 100%.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, I was kind of quite interested. I had a bit of a look at the B Corp website while you were talking, Pete. One thing on that site, it's a bit hard to get hold of anything beyond one question. A bit, you know, I'm trying to get a hang of, you know, what are the various considerations around being a good corporate citizen or a good citizen in general. And so that was the site I was on was a bit thin on and trying to dig a bit deeper. I am interested. Not sure if I've got the energy to invest in rolling it fully out, but I think we would like to grasp the concept and do some things better right off the bat. It certainly fits with disability work, and it certainly fits with a question like, what does our organisation look like from the outside in? from the customer's perspective. What are we really doing? Are we doing stuff that's convenient for us, or are we doing stuff that's more convenient for the people we're supposed to benefit?
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of a couple of little thoughts that crossed my mind on the way through your discussion.
Yeah, it can take a while to fully absorb what it means to be a certified B Corp, and spending some time actually in the B impact assessment and poking around at the questions, and perhaps talking with someone who has completed that assessment then can be useful. It can be helpful to orient you to that way of working. And many organizations find that initially they're not quite ready to take the full leap into certifying, but they may still find the impact assessment helpful in guiding some of their practices. And one thing I do notice is that the same sort of consciousness or awareness of both human nature and the situation of the world that leads an organization to want to be a B Corp also tends to lead to wanting to adopt self-management principles and practices. They're both more human-centered. They're both more sustainable in the long run. They're both oriented away from personal power hierarchies and toward more collaborative, more of a stakeholder orientation rather than a shareholder orientation. So I find that there's a strong overlap in just the spirit that goes into both aspects, both ways of working.
I might have missed it, Pete. Is there a cost to doing the assessment, or do you just leap into it?
The assessment is free. The assessment is free. If you certify, there's an annual fee that starts at, I believe, $500 a year US.
Got it.
I'd love to hear your perspective, Natalie and Marilee. I mean, you've been on this journey with Avivo for at least 18 months now, and especially I was watching both of your body language as Pete was talking, and just what's coming up for you?
Both on mute.
I just tried to get myself on mute. What really stands out for me for the stuff that I've been doing in my area is the learned helplessness, the atrophy of that, and in particular, the context which I am in with a team that there has already been established roles. So there's that stuff that we were talking about last time, I think the time before, was around the hippos. So I think last session we were asked to do an experiment, and mine was around that decision making without a leader. But how do you overcome that learned helplessness because of an already appointed leader? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I follow your question.
Have you heard that phrase hippo before, Pete?
I have, yeah. The highest paid person in the room, their opinion carries a lot of extra weight. Hence the hippo. So I'm thinking a lot of things at once about this. It very much matters, first of all, if there is established leadership, people in nominal hierarchical titled roles that have carried extra weight, it really is incumbent upon them to express their intention to show up differently and to interact differently with the team. And even then, some members of the team may be skeptical for a while. So it's funny, I was meeting with a client this afternoon and we were talking about, they were expressing frustration around some transparency work they've been doing. They've been having some changes in roles. Some people are moving into some different roles and some new people are coming on. And so they've tried to be very transparent with the information around this process. And they were expressing that, sometimes we share all kinds of information and then no one looks at it, no one reads it, and then they're asking questions that show that they didn't check. And then other times they're coming back and pushing back and saying, oh, you're burying me under this avalanche of information. I can't keep up. I can't possibly read all that. And so this leader, they were kind of ready to just throw up their arms and say, the heck with transparency, it doesn't work. And my suggestion was it's going to take a while to unlearn some things. So keep trying, be consistent, continue to be transparent, even till it hurts, right? So, and if folks appear to have not looked at the information, try to be more clear with your expectations, right? So if you share some information purely for the purpose, we talked about that transparency actually supports two principles. It supports building trust, because things aren't happening behind closed doors where there's secrecy. But it also supports making better decisions, right? Because it breaks down information asymmetry and makes sure that everyone's working with the same information. So as you're sharing information transparently, think about the principles you're trying to support, communicate clearly about those, right? So in the spirit of better decision making, I'm sharing this with the three of you so that you'll be better informed when we meet next week to discuss this thing or whatever. Or in the spirit of trust, there's information out there, but you don't need to read it. I'm not setting the expectation that you should be drinking from the fire hose with all this information. It's just so that you know that it's there and it's available should you choose to look at it. So sometimes you just have to over communicate and then be consistent, be steady, repeat until people unlearn the old ways of thinking and being and then start to learn the new ways. And it won't happen overnight.
Can I just ask one more thing? With you mentioned earlier about the profiling of each member to know their tendencies or the way that they may their own. What do you recommend that, or is that just a particular one, or?
Have you used Belbin? I know Kate likes to use Belbin in.
Yeah, I have, and we've done building brilliant teams, but in a different we're in a different space. So now we're in another space. So I don't know whether it's worth sort of going over that again or suggesting that, or that sometimes you just sort of think, oh, we're just doing that again. We're going to do that again.
I mean, I've got an opinion on that. I think that for me, I've found the judicious use of diagnostics to be incredibly liberating, especially if they can help the individual, like Pete said, understand their tendencies. It's not about pigeonholing people or like a horoscope. Obviously she's a Sagittarian, that's why she's like that. It's more about understanding, okay, so I make sense of the world through talking things out. Pete makes sense of the world through thinking things through thoroughly and coming to me once he has an opinion. So why do I get frustrated when Pete comes to me with something and I want to immediately start talking about it, and Pete's like, hold on, I've already gone through this. This is what I think. I'm quite clear. And okay, right. So he makes sense of the world differently than I do. And so knowing that about one another can help us, just get the best out of each other. So that's where I would use diagnostics. I'd never use a diagnostic to decide who's on the team or who does what. It's much more of a tool to kind of make sense of yourself in relation to others. Do you have something to add there, Pete?
I agree.
I actually do.
Go ahead, Zane.
I didn't want to chop you off there, but the knowing what your team makeup is pretty good in trying to recruit somebody that might fill a gap in your awareness as a group. So it can be used for recruitment, but not lent on as the only reason.
Certainly, yeah. I would just add, people can be resistant to being typed, for example. So, charging in just because you went to a workshop and learned Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram or something, come charging in and say, okay, we're all doing this and it's so exciting and I'm going to know all about you. You can meet quite a bit of resistance with that approach, but I find handling it more as an invitation, and particularly one-on-one. Like if I'm having a conversation with someone about becoming a more supportive leader, for example, and I have an opportunity to ask, so, what kinds of frameworks or diagnostic tools or other supporting tools have you used to get to know yourself better? some people will answer, oh yeah, I've used this or that, and here's what I've learned. And many will answer, gosh, is that a thing? Like, what should I do? Can I do that? And at that point, I would say, if it's more of an invitation, like, well, one that's worked well for me is this, and these are some others, and why don't you take a look? Then I don't know. I just find a lot of leaders are resistant to being pigeonholed into a particular assessment or something, but they can be quite useful. I mean, I have found for myself the Enneagram to be really useful in knowing why I tend to behave in certain ways in certain situations, and just learning to become more present to those things, kind of catch myself in the act of, oh, Pete, you're about to judge and be critical here, so pause and take a deep breath and think about that. So yeah, it can be quite useful.
Matt, I'd love you to do your little happy dance again, and then tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah.
There's much happy dance where I think it's twofold for me, just because of where our team sits, but also what our team does within the organisation. So there's so many things. On the personality typing, so our team was made self-managed at the start of the year, so we've been in it for we knew it was coming. It all happened around about April, so a couple of months, but in that time we've done a lot of work around what it looks like for us to be together. And one of our team members is also heavily pregnant, and we'll be losing her shortly. So it's been a really interesting timing. So we've done Melbourne together, so to use some of that, and as Zane said, to consider our gaps and also line it up with strategy. So culture is king. Like that's the lead, and that's your values, and that's how what it means to work together and how we do that together. But then using it side by side with strategy feels so much more purposeful. So we're looking at how we replace with that in mind. I've got so many things. I'm trying to be clear without all the words. Another one we did narrowly, I can share it. Well, I can share it actually on our Slack if it's useful. It's one called Superpowers, which is an offshoot. It's come through IDEO. You're familiar with it, Pete? Yeah. So it's really fun, and it kind of lightens up the tone a bit. And I'm also part of, with the Working Locally project that Avivo's doing with the transformation. It's something that's been happening, as Susan said, over about 18 months, and it's been really consultative. So I guess it's felt slower in a lot of ways narrowly. Would you agree? It sort of feels like this gigantic nebulous ship that's, what's going on? But when you look back, it's moved so much, it's just some days in it feels like you're tumbling a bit. But because of that consultation, it's been interesting. But I'm part of a working group which is to look at creating an opportunity for conversation about citizenship and self-managed teams with back office specifically, because a lot of the field teams have had opportunities already for workshops and information around, what is working locally, what does it mean to be self-managed, but back office hasn't done it yet. And we are planning to use Superpowers. So our team experience, which was made up of different components of back office, so finance, creative, like it's basically the whole shebang. There's kind of one of everything in there with 10 people, began quite uncomfortably, and we've turned into quite a dynamic and really interesting team. And what it's meant is that we showed up in the room as people, not as roles. So we brought who we were, and it's been very, very interesting with the dynamic that it's created, and it's felt so much more powerful and useful to be able to do that. But when we did our superpowers all together and put it all up on the board, there was really mixed responses. I love it all. I think it's fantastic. It's very exciting, and I love knowing those things and knowing the dark side and understanding how that works. But for others, it felt just too vulnerable. It felt too much exposure. But then with time and trust, because our team's now been meeting for 8 or 10 weeks or something, but realizing that teams take time, that trust is built, of course, in tiny little increments, but just that taking away your business card title has meant so much more, as far as being humans and working together to come up with great results on a project. So I could talk for 5 hours. I won't. It's great. I love being here.
I love your enthusiasm and your energy for it, Natalie. That's amazing.
That's good talk.
You raised something for me, which is the question of what's the right pace of change when you're adopting these ways of working. And just a couple thoughts on this. I observe that in, say, traditional management consulting, people who are resistant to change are viewed as problems to be solved. They're viewed as, you know, why don't these people get it, and how do we get them over it so that we can move on? And I think in this type of work, those folks that maybe are not coming along quite as quickly, I try to view that as a feedback loop, as an opportunity for sensing what's going on, because very often there's some fairly powerful reasons behind those say slower adopters or more resistant folks. There may be some things, some echoes of history and the culture, or some sort of organizational memory that's trapped in some very silent places that, you know, that show up in that way. So I find that as a great opportunity to ask good questions, like what's coming up for you here, and tell me more about why this doesn't feel quite right yet, and you know, what's holding you back. And it's so interesting what comes out. And very often those folks that initially might be the slowest to engage or the most skeptical very often become big champions later, but only if they have an opportunity to move at their own speed. So I think the right pace for adopting this kind of change is whatever pace works in your team, in your context. I'm not a big fan of the term best practices, because I think there are no real best practices. There are only good practices in a context, right? So in the context of your organization, you may be able to go much faster than some other organization, or you may need to go more slowly, and they're both okay.
Pete, I just want to pick up on your bit about people that are a bit more resistant. For me, it's picking people who are engaged in whatever the process is, regardless of their stance on the spectrum of forward thinking or resistant.
Mm-hmm.
If they're engaged, that's absolutely brilliant energy that you can use for whatever it is. But often people confuse somebody that might be a little bit cranky or a bit blunt in the way they put stuff
Mm-hmm.
with you know, not a resource that you can tap into there. They are engaged. They just don't deal with it the same way as perhaps we might like.
That's right.
One thing I'd like to share. This'll be familiar to you now, and probably you narrowly as well. This is something that the team at Avivo actually created about a year ago, when all of this was starting. And so the idea that in this process, we've got a couple of kind of lines of decisions. So are we active in the process? Are we feeling like we're still able to make decisions? Are we in the place where we're feeling passive and just going with the flow? Are we in a negative space where we might even end up sabotaging something? Or are we sort of on the positive and fully engaged space? So if we're actively making a decision and feeling negative, maybe I just need to leave.
Mm-hmm.
If you're feeling passive, it's like, this is happening to me and I have no control. So I'm just gonna, if, you know, I'm fully engaged, but I'm just too tired, there's too much BAU, I can't really be thinking about this. And then even if you are like erring towards the positive and fully engaged and actively making decisions, you'll often still be in this place where you're confused and unsure because it's complex and it's chaotic and it keeps moving, but still curious and excited. And the interesting thing about this, that the Avivo team kind of noticed, is that sometimes in a single day you can be in all these places, right? let alone over weeks and months. But to kind of be okay with the fact that all of these feelings and all of these ways of being in something that's so fundamentally about unlearning and learning is absolutely normal and
Mm-hmm.
and actually pretty positive, because at least, you know, kind of moving around. Or when you do land on one, like, the best thing that can ever happen is you know, I think you shared that Pete, like, if you're in a place where it's changing, you know, making that active conscious decision that this isn't the place for you is actually an act of courage and positivity.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to share that because I thought it might be
Yeah.
relevant.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any last minute things before Pete has to go? Anything else coming up for you? Any final sort of words of encouragement or wisdom for the team here, Pete?
Well, I just observed that although you're all at maybe different points in the journey, that there's a lot of wisdom in this group here. You all clearly have both self-awareness and awareness of the tools that you've learned and that Susan's been sharing with you. And so the world needs you. The world needs more of this way of working. It's human-centered. It's more fully alive. And there's a lot of, I mean, obviously you see the purpose of the organizations you're a part of, doing really meaningful work in the world. There's a lot of meaningful work that needs doing. So I love that you're all doing it and that you're committed and that you're committed to continuing to learn and grow as you work on it. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Pete. And I'll keep on sharing your articles because they are great. And we'll catch up soon. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Bye, buddy.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Now you can say what you really think now that he's gone. No, I'm kidding.
He might watch the recording.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I hope you found that useful. I think that I really appreciate his kind of measuredness and wisdom. It's not like he kind of gets up and does the big rah-rah saying that this is going to be easy and this is how you do it. I just really appreciate that. Yeah, just he's actually learned through doing it. And I think he said he started this journey about 8 years ago, and it takes time, man. And it takes a lot of trial and error and experimentation to get to something that feels good and feels real. So I hope that it gave you some, kind of courage and confidence. We've still got a bit of time left, so it's really up to you guys. What are you feeling like you want to talk about? I know that Zane, you were going to share your Canvas. Just wondering if you wanted to do that now, or if you want to wait till next time when maybe there's a little bit of a bigger crowd. It's totally up to you.
No, I'm happy to go ahead. I just wasn't sure of how to go about it. What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
Just read it to you, or do I need to post it up? Or
But do you have it on your screen that you can maybe share your screen?
No, I'm on an iPad.
Okay.
So that was my question. I did. Excuse me, I've got a lousy memory for names. Who's our other cohort from WACE?
Kate.
Kate. I did shoot her a Slack message a couple of days ago asking that question, but I'm not sure if I'm kind of interacting on Slack properly yet. But anyway, I'm quite happy to scan these and load them up to wherever they need to go.
Yeah, why don't you do that, and then next session you can have them on the screen and you can talk to them. That might be
easy done. Yeah.
Cool. So just curious, the rest of you, what else was coming up for you from Pete? I know that Nat, you said a lot was on your mind. Anything else you'd like to share? Maybe get the group to think about with you together.
Maybe. It was great hearing Pete speak about it, and just that it does take time. I think that felt reassuring to hear that, I think for the first time in the last 12 months, last week I found myself in the wrong quadrant and it hit me pretty hard because I haven't sort of been there yet, and it was a bit of a shock. But that's my pleasant surprise. That's what was really interesting about the team I was speaking about, the other working group that isn't my usual tribe. We've thrown together to do a piece of work. We've been doing the check-ins as a practice to start our meetings, and just having them, I was just completely raw and honest and said, this is shit today, I hate all of it, I don't want to do it. And it was quite incredible how the team worked together and how everyone responded. And it meant that others were really raw that day also, and then others were able to be really supportive. So that was my pleasant surprise. I felt like I now have a way bigger team just from working differently with a different group of people that I wouldn't previously have needed to have anything to do with. So I'm, back on the flip side of the quadrant. So I was reassured hearing him say that it takes time, that there's no right pace, that repeat. I think in comms and engagement, we've done all the things are there, the information's all there. We've done, this has gone out, it's gone out in 6 different forms, and we're still hearing we haven't been told. And it's frustrating and it's infuriating some days, and wondering what else we can do and how else we can do it, but realising that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to keep quietly moving along and staying true to, what we're doing. So I feel reassured having heard him speak.
What else was coming for you, Katina? Like, I could see you just agreeing a lot of what he was.
No. I actually, what I agreed with was, maybe it's the wrong words. Ever since I started this new organisation about 6 years ago, I kept feeling as if I was taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And I thought, is it ever going to get to where I really would like it to be? But now, listening to Pete, it's made me realise that was, as you say, everyone's learning at a different pace. I probably didn't have the right team behind me. And now I'm slowly getting the right sort of people who are supporting me the right way. And it was just a learning curve, just, trying to get to where I am now. And I can actually see a bit of a future ahead where I've got a team who is much more supportive, and they're working together in a team environment. And they're coming up with ideas that, which I wanted them to, because I said, it's not just about me. I said, this business, I'm actually building it for your future. For your future, our clients' future, for the community's future.
Katina, what do you think changed either in you or in the way that you're interacting that has started to give them the confidence that their opinion matters and that their ideas are valuable?
I don't know whether it was, maybe it was me, maybe I changed. Maybe I realized that the people I had around me, it was how are they going to benefit? It was more about them. It was never ever about everyone else around them. So I allowed them to be themselves and to make the mistakes and to actually make their own decisions if it wasn't going to work. I lost actually quite a few people along the way who in the end they thought, no, this is not for me, because they weren't really on the same road as what the business was supposed to be on. What I was trying to get through to them was, we're trying to empower people with disabilities to take more responsibility for themselves and their lives, but you have to actually give them the tools to be able to do it with. You can't just make decisions for them. You have to allow them to make those decisions, whether they're right or wrong, and support them along the way. And they will in turn support you. Some of those people who started to work for me weren't on the same road. They seemed to think that we should make all those decisions. And I says, well, no, it doesn't work like that. So this is not our purpose for our business. Our purpose is to empower them and for their own future. I says, we might not be here, for the future. They have to be able to stand on their own 2 feet to make their own decisions. And whether that's right or wrong decision, it's their decision. And they have to learn from it too. And that's another reason why I think we learn to keep our clients, because when we do our training, we invite our clients to come along. We have such a transparency about the whole business that even our clients are invited to come along to training if they want to, and some do. And occasionally they, give us their opinion as to how they see how we can improve. Our support workers are all invited, our office staff. So it's a combined meeting where we all have the opportunity to, you know, learn from each other.
Yeah, for sure. And
yeah,
then,
you know, make sense?
Yeah. And then what about you, Zane? I mean, out of the organizations here, your organization is much more of like a traditional social enterprise. You know, you're a for-profit organization, and
No, we're not for profit.
Sorry, Zane, I'm saying, not Katina.
Oh, okay.
No, Zane. And so how does that do you think the difference is for you, having that different framing for your work?
Okay, just a bit of background. We are a non-profit, but we've come the other way. Not a for-profit coming back into non-profit.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So, well, for us, it was we never had funding. So when we started, we're a project of Midwest Sports Federation. They had funding, and we were a project. And a few years ago, they said, "Righto, baby bird, time to fly. You're either going to make it or not." At that point in time, Disability Services Commission weren't funding us. We were project funded. And so we were looking for excellent projects to conduct that might meet our mission, which is access and inclusion. So we were always kind of thinking a little bit out of the box. What's different for Atlas, I guess, is that I'm not direct employed. I'm not an employee of Atlas. I'm actually procured. I'm a consultant, so I work for a lot of other organisations as well, Atlas being one of them. And so the board, look, I think they showed a real kind of willingness to think out of the box right back then, when I've been around for about 4 years with Atlas now. And they said, for the money we could direct employ somebody, why don't we think about how the exec officer role works in a completely different way. Let's set some targets and manage that person in that way. So already they kind of were thinking quite out of the box. I don't know of any other NGOs across the state that do it that way. So the other thing, Ben, not really having any funding, we had to consider, you know, a mission that's not dependent on government funding. And so when you ask a non-profit, how do you achieve your mission without government funding, which for most of us is the guts of our funding. We're so reliant on government because we tender to them, we ask for grants and things like that. It's often that we actually don't think about another source, yet we kind of entertain some rhetoric about it. You know, what does a corporate sponsorship look like? How do we fundraise? Things like that. And it wasn't until I went to Laos last year that I saw an entire country where there was no government funding and lots of non-profits all achieving a mission. So our dialogues kind of connected with that experience, and seeing for-profits and the way that they connected up with non-profits. An anecdote that I'll kind of tell you based on that kind of gives you an idea of what we're thinking was, we're over doing an AusAid project, and I bumped into a guy who was an engineer, Kiwi guy, Baha'i by faith, which means that he likes to serve his community. And he happened to be mates with the exec officer of the organisation that I was working with. And we grabbed him to fit out a bus to make it the first wheelchair accessible bus in Laos. Anyway, beyond that, I said, I'm a bit interested in what else you do. And he took me for a tour through his engineering plant, which is basically a shed tacked on the back of his house. And down the bottom of his yard, there was a little lean-to with people with disability, a couple of women and a couple of young fellas making clay pots. And I said, what are those things? And he said, oh, they are water filters. And that's a little non-profit called Abundant Water. I had some space on my block, and with that guy, I was doing a bit of engineering, kind of tinkering, a bit of science. And they designed these clay water filters that mean that, you know, villages can have good water, because, you know, the big kind of mortality thing is waterborne disease in a lot of developing countries. And I thought, that's bloody interesting. I'm going to go and have a yarn with those guys. And what they do is they mix coffee grounds in with the clay and then fire it, and the coffee grounds burn off and they create little pores in the clay that a water molecule can get through, but a bacteria can't. And so that they give these clay filters out. That's a little non-profit that come out of a partnership with that. Where they got the coffee grounds was from a mob called Joma Coffee, which is a Canadian guy that is partners with a couple of mates from Canada who live in Singapore, and they've got 3 coffee stores in Laos and a couple in Vietnam. Anyway, this guy, I thought I'll follow this through. I want to see what's going on. I went and had a yarn with the manager at Joma Coffee, the Canadian guy. He happened to push a wheelchair as well, which is an interesting challenge in Laos. But I was going there, I was doing some work for a women's centre, and I was going to see if I can get a few jobs out of him. And he said, I employ people direct off the street with no education. They walk in my door and I pay them a wage from day one. They do start sweeping the floor and cleaning toilets, but they are on a wage. And he introduced me to his store manager who'd been there for 4 years, and he was earning equitable wages to anybody like that. He spoke some pretty good, what I'd call restaurant English. He could tell you what's on the menu and things like that, but not much more, and have a conversation with me about his journey. And I thought, that's bloody inspirational, what this guy was doing, right out of the B Corp playbook. A bloke that wanted to run a business with a social conscience, and the partnerships that they had developed. I went, there's lots of ways to push a mission other than chasing government dollar.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's what makes Atlas a bit different, because we consider that alternative, I guess.
Thanks for that. That was great.
Yeah. One other thing I'll add is that we also considered, do we actually need to be here? Under an NDIS, it was an NDIS type discussion. I said, there's a lot of providers that can do exactly what we do if they turn their mind to it. What's so special about Atlas that we need to be here? So that once you kind of consider that you might not be here in a couple of years, that you won't exist, because we had made a decision that we aren't going to merge, then you start getting particularly urgent and creative about how you achieve your mission. If you give a worker a fixed term project and tell them they're gone at the end of that, and there's, you have to get this outcome, watch them start scurrying. That sense of urgency when you think you're not going to be here. Look, I love working in that. It's not very settling though for a lot of people. But that kind of urgency and the energy that comes out of that's just inspirational to be around.
Yeah, and it's interesting. That's the opposite of the approach Pete took with his first org, right? He said, no, we can't make this something that is going to feel good for me. So as soon as everybody gets jobs, then we're shutting it down. And he could do the opposite, which is, totally picture a future without that organization. And that was the better choice. So that's pretty brave as well. But yeah, I do really love that as like super grounding for the organization's purpose. Just I guess final word to Narrowly. So interesting you're noticing about still working in teams with individuals who have not managed to, and this is maybe projecting, but not managed to let go of their self-identification as the boss or the person with the control. Pete, I think, gave some interesting insights into how that shift can happen. But what do you do if that shift doesn't happen, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I know, but I think that there's been a lot of things said today that that can be tried. And I think one of the things that Nat had said too around, or it could have been around being patient and being a little bit slower to not slower. What were we saying? Just let people go to at their own pace. Yeah.
And maybe even just asking more questions. I think I heard Pete offering like, so what's really going on for you here? What are you really thinking? Is there anything I can do to help you feel better about this, or like understand it more, or
Yeah. I do honestly think that it is that learned helplessness. Yeah, and I'm interested to try a few different things, like they said, a healthy balance of information. So, and applying the principles of support, like you just said, what's going on for you. But there is, and I'm harping on about this, it is those things that typo stuff within the team too, because we're all sort of slack at the moment, but there still is that undertone of different roles within the team too, or historical expansive roles that could sit there and are still noticeable.
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I saw that Nat, you put up about that superhero stuff, and we've got some younger team members who I think that will sort of dovetail well for them. Yeah.
Great.
Susan?
Yes.
Susan, I've actually, one of my employees has just walked in, and can I just put him on so that he can just give you a bit about how he feels about working for our organisation and where he sees where our problems are?
I'd love that. I think that'd be a lovely way to finish. If you could do it in about 3 or 4 minutes, that'd be great.
Sure. Okay.
Thanks.
I'll just let him move.
Thanks.
Over then. Right. When you're ready, you can. This is Matthew.
Good afternoon. Good morning. Morning, everyone.
Hi, Matthew.
Hi. Yes, and I was just having a little discussion with Tina about what I think is happening in our organization. I think one of the things that is sort of an issue for our organization is there seems to be a lot of communication between certain people. And that maybe it's because those employees are not there constantly, maybe every day, they work less hours. So I feel that we're sort of having quite a few issues with communication, and sort of a lot of information gets passed through one person, and then everyone else has to go to that person to try and gather the information. We did have an internal meeting to discuss maybe what our issues were. We felt that maybe we're not communicating well about the processes. Or when we have a deadline, for example, if we were to recruit an employee, we have procedures to follow. But once someone in HR has completed their procedures, the other person who needs to, maybe someone in the accounts needs to prepare everything. But how are they going to know? So we're sort of realized maybe we need to communicate on that better. And one thing we've come up with is we've actually thought maybe we'll come up with a sort of like a communication template which outlines all the procedures and who is responsible for each of those procedures. And once all those steps have been completed, if it was, for example, recruitment, it's HR. Once HR has completed all their procedures, then it must be passed on to the next person. So we're looking at starting that for us. I think that will be very beneficial for our organization, because that means we'll be able to pass information even if someone's not there.
I think that's an excellent plan, an excellent experience, and I think we'd all love to hear over the next few weeks and months how that intervention changes things for you, and maybe what you've learned, and maybe in your first in your first kind of understanding of that, what you might change and what you might learn along the way. So I'd love it if you, even if you came back to share your learnings on this call, or if Katina could share them. I think that's a really great experiment. And I was just wondering, Natalie, from your perspective, being in a in a comms and engagement role, what you've seen work for, especially for people that maybe are on teams where you very rarely see each other.
I think something that we've identified with Avivo is face-to-face communication. It's really tricky, but it's, because of the spread of people, but it still seems to be something that people are yearning for, that human contact. I don't know. I think, we're still in such a phase of trying all the different variations, from emails to internal to printouts and handouts. And I think it has just been that consistent and somewhat repetitive nature of letting people know the same things. I think the ability to have multiple sort of connection points, so like a feedback loop where you do part of, setting up a procedure set like that might be that we set it up and then in 4 weeks we meet to discuss where we're up to so far and tweak it more quickly than letting it go for 6 months and everybody just wanders off into the abyss. So maybe, it's that kind of shorter touch point, I think, seems to be helpful. But it's ongoing, the evolution.
and every organization is different, right? But yeah, thanks for sharing that. That was great. Shall we check out? I'd love for us just to, take a breath. I personally really always enjoy having a little bit of, I feel like I actually enjoy having a smaller group because I feel like we can get to know each other a little bit better and kind of sink into our practice, and really appreciated having Pete here today, of course. And looking forward to the wedding this weekend, and looking forward, obviously next session will be about reviewing your experiment. So please come prepared to share what you've got, where you've got to, and Kate will be back next time. So I guess just check out in a few words, how are you feeling after the session? I'm feeling tired. It's been a long day, but really grateful and inspired. Narrowly.
I'm feeling really motivated, and I think I have to let a lot of this sink into me today. And I've had like a million things running through my head, but this has been a really awesome session, and I agree with smaller groups allows for a little bit more comfortable space sometimes for people to talk and listen.
Thanks.
Looking forward to the weekend.
Same.
Yeah, I've got to say, Susan, this is a pretty valuable experience for us. Being able to collect, these wide-ranging ideas in a little snapshot is pretty. You can spend an entire uni course trying to collect some of these ideas. So this is a pretty valuable experience. I'm very grateful for it. For me, the thing out of this is that I'm going to collect all these ideas and then go and think about them and work out how they work for us in our context. So you probably won't find me rolling out any one particular idea fully through to the end. You'll see me doing bits and pieces that work for us as a little startup, and testing them out and seeing where they work and thinking about whether they'll apply for something else I'm doing. So yeah, I'm here for the entire journey. It's great.
Awesome. Thanks, Katina. You've done so well, Katina. Thank you for hanging in there.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'm just going to take it easy this weekend, but this is a valuable experience for me because although I've been in the industry quite a long time. It's changing all the time, this industry, and you learn an awful lot from people. Years ago, when I first started out, we actually had something similar where there was a few of organisations who used to get together, and we used to come together as a team, and we used to have different speakers, similar to what we're doing now, and we used to learn from one another. And I miss that. And I was trying to reinstate it again, and I'm still thinking of doing it because quite a few of the other agencies have expressed an interest in coming together as small groups that we go to each other's offices and have meetings, and we can even have speakers and learn from each other as to how we can improve things. This weekend I've also got a 90th on. One of my clients turns 90. So we'll be celebrating her birthday. I just hope I'll be well enough to go. And if not, I won't be able to because I don't want to make her sick either. So we'll see. If not, I might have to send Matthew along. He can stand in for me.
Matthew, would you like to check out?
Yeah. There you go, Matthew.
Okay. Well, in the few minutes I've been here, it sounds quite interesting to what you've been all discussing. I think this is very important. Yes, I also agree with Tina that it is great that we have a few organizations all trying to collaborate with each other, especially with, there's got a lot of changes, especially with new legislation coming in. I think that's going to be a big game changer for the organization.
Great, thank you. Natalie?
I think I probably covered it before, but I feel quite reassured and grateful for the opportunity. Yeah, every little piece of the puzzle helps with, the next step. And I'm just coming to get used to sitting in the idea that those steps aren't gigantic leaps, that they're, tiny little plodding along. And when you turn around, you realise you've gone 10 Ks.
Exactly. Thanks, everybody. Just a note, something that was coming up for me when you were sharing. It would always be welcome, certainly for myself and Kate, to feedback to WACE if you're finding this useful. They're getting ready, obviously, to do their budgets for next year, and if you think that it could be valuable for something like this to continue or for this program to be offered again for others, I think that giving that feedback to Leanne could be really useful. So we'd certainly appreciate that, even though we're like nowhere near being done, but any feedback is good feedback. So have a beautiful weekend, everybody, and looking forward to seeing you and getting an update in a couple of weeks. Bye.